Its first big industrial stoush as it takes on one of Australia's most powerful unions, the Construction, Forestry, Mining and Energy Union, the CFMEU. Moves are afoot to reinstate one of the most controversial elements of John Howard's work choices policy, the Australian Building and Construction Commission. Its job is to stop union thuggery and to enforce a national building code. But, as Adam Harvey reports, its return looks set to reopen old wounds.
This battle at Melbourne's Myer Emporium site was an old-style industrial dispute. No quarter was given. On either side. It was a classic display of industrial muscle by one of the nation's most powerful unions, the CFMEU. The union was fighting for the right to install its own safety representatives at the site.
I'm sure most Australians will recall the very ugly scenes that we saw at the Myer Emporium site in Melbourne, where police horses were being punched by an unruly mob of individuals who were demonstrating in circumstances where the actual workers on the site were happy with the boss, were happy with their conditions.
The construction union lost this battle. Builder Grocon refused to accept the union's picks. 1 year on, the union's war rages on, but out of sight as it targets one of Grocon's suppliers, building materials company Boral.
We've probably lost the equivalent of 10,000 concrete trucks worth of delivery of product in Victoria because of this action by the CFMEU. It's probably cost us over $1 million in legal fees. We've lost probably $7 million in revenue in the Victorian market, all attributable to this fight that the CFMEU has with Grocon.
Boral's concrete trucks are turned away from scores of sites controlled by the CFMEU because Boral sells concrete to one of the union's enemies.
We've been sort of dragooned into a fight that they have with Grocon that we're not a party to. It is a bizarre situation that's unfolded, and we may be the largest target of their activity outside of Grocon, but we didn't volunteer for this. We didn't ask to be involved in it.
Boral has won court injunctions ordering the CFMEU to stop this secondary boycott, but to no effect.
It's become much more subtle. While they're occasionally still trying this stopping of trucks or delaying of trucks onto entry onto sites, it's become much more of an intimidation of our customer base. And our customers, frankly, are intimidated and fearful about coming forward.
The National Secretary of the CFMEU, Dave Noonan, says a tough industry calls for tough tactics.
Our members make it very clear they expect a union which is active, a union which, when necessary, will take up their issues with the employer. Construction workers have been militant since Christ was a carpenter, and they expect a union which does the job for them.
They're well organised, they're well resourced, they're ruthless, and their approach is to play hardball day in, day out, and they don't have a high regard for the law, in my view.
The union's next fight is with the coalition government.
The current legislation clearly isn't sufficiently tough enough to deal with the thuggery and intimidation that has unfortunately been a hallmark of the building and construction sector.
To tackle the union, the Abbott Government is moving to reconstitute one of the most controversial weapons of John Howard's industrial armoury, the Australian Building and Construction Commission. Legislation will be introduced in the first week of Parliament in mid-November, giving the Commission powers to levy big fines over disputes like the Boral boycott.
I don't think it's too much to ask that that we actually have the rule of law abiding. Now, all you've got to do is remember the ugly scenes at the Myer Emporium building and ask yourself the question, who is it that's itching for a fight? I don't think it's us, the government. Having the CFMEU brought to heel in some of its activities will in fact enhance the reputation of the trade union movement.
The government will restore the Commission's powers, which included the authority to jail reluctant witnesses.
So the ABCC had the power to require people to give evidence. If they didn't, the maximum penalty was 6 months in prison.
We know who's winning this battle. We're winning this battle, not them rats.
The union is vowing to fight the new regime, just as it did until the Commission was disbanded by Labor.
There's an old saying. My mum used to use the saying, I've said it once before. She used to say, the more you touch shit, the more it smells. Well, that's them. They are shit. They're the shit that they are.
While Abbott governs and advocates these policies, the zombies and vampires of work choices never rest. They're out of their graves. They're not dead, buried and cremated. They're roaming the streets, hungry for the blood and brains of workers.
The unions have at times a tendency to personalise attacks, but yes, you've got to be resilient.
When this is all over and they don't exist anymore, they've got to work elsewhere. And we will remember them, because we know every one of them. We will never forget them. Thanks, fellas.
The Coalition has just appointed the ABCC's former head, John Lloyd, as chair of the Fair Work Building Inspectorate, where he'll be helping to lay the groundwork for the Commission's return.
The industry has a history of appalling and unlawful conduct. It's widespread and it's entrenched. The only time that the industry observed and upheld the law was during the period of the ABCC.
Anton, you're the lawyer, son.
Taking on the union cost this Perth builder his business. Jerry Hanson's sites were boycotted for weeks.
I paid the people on my side on an AWA, which is... He's lying, his lips are moving.
Finally, I couldn't pay the bills anymore and had to wind my company up.
He estimates he spent $2.5 million in legal fees, and it took him years to rebuild his business.
They sent me into hell, and 3 years of absolute intimidation and blackmail and extortion and you name it taught me that nothing is worse than that. So going broke was no longer an issue. I was broke. So from there on it was only a win. You cannot sink lower than nothing.
We're not saying that it shouldn't represent the rights of their members. All we're saying is, why don't you just behave like normal people? Why don't you behave lawfully? Why do you have to boast about breaking the law?
Sometimes unions will have to take a stand which may not always be popular, and sometimes we need to explain ourselves better, but we make no apology for putting our members' safety ahead of the opinions of a few politicians or shock jocks.
The return of the Building Commission is shaping up as the first big stoush of the Abbott Government. For Borrell's Mike Kane, it can't come soon enough.
It's much better than asking police to be there to try to enforce the law at every concrete delivery. We would expect to see that in the third world, not in the first world.